One of the most difficult parts of being on the receiving end of a penetration test is the remediation work that comes after, right? If you're an IT admin, you know how difficult it can be to mitigate, resolve, patch, update, fix all of these identified findings during your pen test, especially across your endpoints, which is what we're going to talk about in this video. So in this video, we're going to discuss common problems IT teams run into when remediating pen test findings and how endpoint management actually plays into this picture and how it actually can help solve a lot of these problems and mitigate a lot of these pen test findings that are related to endpoints and endpoint management. So with me again today, I have Jeff Hunter, field CTO at NinjaOne. We did another video on vulnerability management, so go check that out. But Jeff, looking forward to this next discussion and demo with you. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be back on the program.
Awesome. So we're going to set up the problem a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the common pitfalls and some of the common issues that IT teams, especially internal IT, mid-size org, MSPs who work with mid-size organizations, right? Internal IT and MSPs, the common challenges they're faced when remediating pen test findings that are related to endpoints, right? In your fleet of computers, Windows, Mac, Linux, all those different endpoints that you may be managing. So in my work as an internal pen tester, I see this a lot of times, Jeff, in that we do an internal pen test and we find findings related to the endpoints. And we're going to talk about some of those, and you're going to demonstrate through the NinjaOne platform some of the capabilities and some of the benefits of having endpoint management and, of course, the NinjaOne platform. But the point is, a lot of findings are related to the endpoints, misconfigured scheduled tasks or just hardening activities of endpoints. So we're going to talk about some of those problems. One of the problems that I want to call out is just the volume and the repeatability of the issue. So when I do an internal pen test, I'll find an issue on, say, a single endpoint, and I won't necessarily have time to check all of the thousands of endpoints, right, in the organization. So we need a way to kind of identify those and a scalable way to patch those issues or remediate those issues across the fleet. So one of the problems that you probably see too is this volume of issues. It not just affects one machine; it affects a large number of machines, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, if you have the opportunity, you always try as an administrator to standardize as much as possible. And a side effect of that standardization means that when one device has a configuration problem, it probably means all of them have it. And to your point, you mentioned the scale is really the important part, the repeatability. Being able to have visibility across all your devices of where this misconfiguration is in place, and then being able to not just easily remediate it, but essentially just automate it so that whenever this misconfiguration is detected, you can just automatically respond to it. That's my preference. I figure if I have to do something once, if I have to do something twice, why am I not automating it and making it something that can be really easily repeatable so that I don't have to do all this work again in the future?
Yep, exactly. And you mentioned the automation thing as like a force multiplier, right? Back when I was working in IT, we had 6, 7, 8 people, 9 people. By the time I had left that to do consulting, and we very much were stretched thin, right? As I'm sure many IT teams are. They're understaffed, under-resourced, right? You're stretched thin, and you need to keep the lights on. You need to do all these things to protect the organization, to keep the business running, to keep the lights on, as they say. And automation can really pay big dividends to help scale that and as a force multiplier.
I completely agree with that, and that's something I have a lot of personal experience with. My all-time least favorite repetitive, monotonous task that I had to do manually was device provisioning. Before I worked at Ninja, I was the director of technical services and head of field service engineering for a movie theater chain. And one of the things I was responsible for in the early days was provisioning devices. And that was something I didn't like. And because it was a manual process, I know stuff got missed. I know that there were configurations that I did not take care of. Certain settings were not properly applied.
Mm.
And that, of course, creates some sort of vulnerable security risk in your fleet. And so for me, the benefit of automation is yes, I don't want to have to do it manually. I'm very happy to have that process taken out of my hands directly. But there's also the reduction of human error. It
Mhm.
just gives you the ability to automatically provision these devices with the proper configurations that you want. And again, to your point, something that is repeatable, something that is just automatically happening at scale across your fleet so that as soon as the devices are provisioned, you know that they're configured properly. But then, as we'll talk about in a little bit when we get into the demonstration, there's also the nature of ongoing monitoring. You
Mhm.
don't want to just rely at the very inception of the device's life cycle and say, hey, well, I did it then, so we're good for the next couple of years, right? No, you want to monitor that over time and kind of have that recurring check to know that, hey, things don't always remain in compliance. Certain patches, certain updates, things can absolutely happen that are not desired, and knowing when that occurs at scale across your fleet, I think is key to having an efficient operation and actually, having a good security posture as opposed to always playing catch up.
Yep. And that's something that I say all the time on when I do internal pen tests is like, many folks want to know if something goes bump in my network, am I going to get an alert? Same thing with configuration errors or remediations across your devices. Like when something breaks or when something isn't configured right or there's drift, you want to know about it so that you can remediate it. And hopefully you have a way to kind of, like you said, automate that remediation so that you know about it and it gets automatically fixed. And another common issue that I see is kind of geographically dispersed organizations, right? This is very common with law firms who have like multiple offices in different parts of the country and obviously other industries as well. But that one just came to mind. And, if you have offices in San Francisco and New York and Boston and Texas, maybe they're all connected, maybe not, depends on how you're managing those systems. But that can be another challenge for endpoint management and device management is you've got these geographically dispersed machines, you've got remote users, you've got hybrid users. So you need a good way to kind of manage all of those and be able to deploy fixes and patches and remediations to those no matter where they are.
Yeah, I mean, that is the reverberating effects of 2020, which is that the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's not going back anytime soon when it comes to remote and hybrid work. Everybody just expects that they can pick up their laptop, pick up their mobile device, and work from anywhere in the world, just like they used to have to work in an office. And so that obviously presents a lot of challenges for support, but then it also presents a lot of challenges for the security side of things and ensuring that these configurations that whenever they are drifting, whenever they're not in place the way that we would expect. And so, to your point, having that automation in place to where you can detect when configuration is drifting and then automatically reply remediation, and that's an always on thing as long as the device is connected to the internet, that you're able to have that kind of quick and smooth response. That absolutely, I think, promotes a stronger security posture.
Yeah, for sure. And so the solution, or if I will, obviously there's no such thing as silver bullets, but as close as we can get to a full and complete optimized solution as we can is some sort of endpoint management tool or platform or product to help manage that. Right? It gone are the days of sneaker netting and manually updating things. It just takes too long. It's too error prone and all the issues that we talked about already. So having an endpoint management solution is really beneficial for a number of key reasons that I just want to briefly touch on. And then I'm really curious to see the demos and like actually see the hands-on stuff because that's the stuff I really like. So centralized visibility, insight into all of your managed devices is one, and then the consistency and accuracy of control of those devices, right? Deploying the same configuration setting to all those endpoints. So the visibility and the control, right, and the consistency that you mentioned is really key to being able to do this at scale and across your entire fleet. Right? Right, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I mentioned standardization earlier and kind of my previous past with movie theaters. And when we would physically build movie theaters, we actually built them all the exact same way with the idea that not everybody was always going to be at the same location. They were going to move around, and you wanted to have that repeatability. You wanted to have that capability so that when somebody went in there, or when I was providing remote support, that I had that standardization in place. And to kind of pivot that to more of an endpoint management type example, that standardization, or that ability to be flexible but present an easy path, a similar path for common management across different devices and across different groups of devices. I think that's key for efficient endpoint management. It's not just that you want to be able to automate as much as possible, as you want to be able to automate in a smooth way that also guides technicians and allows them to provide the best remote support, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Is that the automation and the smoothness of that process, um, you know, speeds up the process more or less, right? Because you can deploy faster, you can deploy to multiple machines at once, and to your point about standardization, you know, reduces downtime and overhead, right? So those are two things that we haven't really touched on yet. If you want to elaborate more on, how that automation kind of increases your ability to react faster, and then also kind of reduce mistakes and downtime and overhead.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point that not all automation is created equally. I think a lot of the times we think in terms of automation that just entirely does the process end to end, and there's no real human involvement. And that's great. We obviously, we're all about that. But there's also, I think, a recognition that that's not always entirely possible. And so I think automation that partially accelerates a process, a long, complicated process, and minimizes the need for human involvement, to me, that can be just as valuable uh, as automating a process from end to end. That is relatively simple. So yeah, I think that partial acceleration of processes, using automation to surface information to technicians so that they can make quicker, faster, more efficient decisions. That is also a very valid use case for automation. It's not just about, hey, this is doing my job for me. It's that when you need assistance, that you have a system set in place that is able to find this information and surface it to technicians and make technicians better, make technicians faster, not just kind of, well, hey, a technician doesn't have to do this job. Uh, Automation has that place, I think, of course, but it also has the place of enhancing, supporting, and improving the overall technician's experience as well.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. For sure. That's awesome. So I'm excited. Let's if you're ready, you want to dig into some demos and talk about how this stuff works in like real life?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let me get the screen up. Okay, so everybody, this is Jeff's screen. So we're going to talk about some use cases, and Jeff's going to walk through some demonstrations of how this works in practice and what it might look like in real life for anybody who's using the NinjaOne platform and trying to do this endpoint management stuff.
Yeah, so I think one thing I want to talk about to start with is what I mentioned with device provisioning, essentially the inception of the device's life cycle. How are we configuring it to, kind of take our first steps of making that operating system overall less compatible for malicious attackers to gain a foothold? And so in NinjaOne, everything is driven by the policy. And so if we go into the policy, you'll see that we have all these settings here. And the first one we're going to look at is scheduled automations. And you can see in here, I have a whole slew of automations that are running on regular schedules. But in fact, the very top one that we see here doesn't necessarily run on a schedule. It runs whenever the device joins the policy. So as soon as the agent is installed, everything that we see here will then run across that device. And so what are we doing here? It's a lot of the common things you would expect for device provisioning. For starters, I want to make sure the device doesn't go to sleep while I'm trying to configure it. But then if we go down a little bit further, you'll see that I'm patching, I'm installing applications. And then we start to get into some device configurations that are going to be important for compliance and for any sort of audit. Of course, right here, we can see BitLocker. So enabling BitLocker, NinjaOne natively escrows the BitLocker recovery key. And so we just need to run this script on a device that's capable of being enabled with BitLocker. And so that would automatically enable, and then we would have that recovery key accessible in the platform. And so other items might be system restore. Right here, we can see that we're enabling or disabling the Windows firewall. We can also have the option here of blocking inbound connections if we wanted to. And a lot of these scripts that I'm showing off here, these are built by Ninja engineers. We have something called the template library. And that is, at this point, 288 scripts that our
Wow.
engineers maintain. That has just been a great project over the last 2 years or so. And what we do is try to cover a lot of common IT use cases so that you don't have to write or find your own script. You have something that's been tested and QA'd through Ninja, so you have the confidence that it's going to work in the vast majority of situations. And so there's a lot of scripts that we'll see here today that are in that template library. I feel like it's kind of hidden, so I do always like to show it off. So if we go into administration and then library and then automation, you'll see the template library right here. Again, 288 scripts, and this crosses Windows,
Nice.
Linux, and Mac OS. So you are pretty much covered on everything that NinjaOne is going to support that can run a script. And so we'll see some more of these in just a little bit. And so right here, you can see another common security configuration item here is we're going to disable LAN manager hash storage right here. Similar, do we want to enable or disable the macro execution in Microsoft Office? Again, all template library
Nice.
scripts, so this is really easy to go ahead and get set up. Now, again, this is great, disable local admin tools. But again, this is at the inception of the device's lifecycle. This isn't necessarily an ongoing check. When we say it runs once immediately, we mean it. It's going to only run once when it first joins this policy, and then you could run it manually again if you wanted to. But I want to talk a little bit about how we can make this a little bit more targeted and a little bit more granular, while also giving us some alerting so that we have a great logging experience over time to see where we might have configuration drift. And so that's going to be driven by our conditions. And you'll see two options for conditions on the left-hand side. One is standard conditions, where it's 1-to-1 for a metric. You monitor a metric, and then if that alerts, it creates a ticket. And then compound conditions actually takes in multiple criteria into account. So you can use different permutations and combinations of the 4 conditions you see here to get a little bit more targeted with your alerting. But for now, I want to stick with the conditions here. And you can see I'm auditing a lot of things at the very top here. For example, BitLocker status. We're enabling BitLocker at the very beginning of the device's lifecycle, but then if BitLocker is ever off, or if BitLocker is ever unlocked for a certain period of time, then we might want an operational alert. And you can, of course, exclude certain disks and certain volume labels here. A lot of the virtual machines in this environment don't actually support TPM, so that's why you see me having this disabled here on the boot volume, because otherwise it would be very noisy. But then I want to talk about the concept of being able to respond to these conditions automatically. So right now, we've got step 1. We are creating some sort of ticket probably whenever we have an issue. And in this case, the issue is that BitLocker is not actually enabled. But it would be great to respond to this with an automation. And so on the right-hand side, we can go ahead and we can run that BitLocker script that we saw earlier. So I'll go ahead and add that in there. And so now the process ends up being a 2-step process. One is that we recognize we've got some sort of configuration issue and we raise an alert. Step 2, we respond to it with 1 or more scripts. And then step 3 is driven by the when no longer met option right here. This is the closed loop element. So when that script works and it enables BitLocker and BitLocker is no longer off, the Ninja agent will recognize that and it will reset the alert and also reset the corresponding ticket that got created from it. And so now you have a long-term historical record in your ticketing system of when there was some sort of issue with configuration drift, and then you can very easily see that it was remediated quite quickly there. Now, that's one example, and we can really start to make this something that is fully fleshed out here. So for example, right here, we have the firewall audit status. This is, again, another script from the template library, just checking to see if the firewall is enabled or not. And then right there, when I get an alert, I am able to go ahead and raise that ticket and then respond to it with another automation or multiple automations. And this is a great feature of NinjaOne that I love. It's called script result condition, and it lets you convert any script into an alert. And so you're not limited by built-in conditions in NinjaOne. Anything that you can script, which is quite a bit, there's a lot of different things you can script, that can now become an alert. And so that really enhances your capability to push things out to devices. Here's another example, kind of on a different hack here, but I'm actually monitoring for the presence of a particular file, a findings list on the device that actually contains my security baseline settings. And so if that file is ever missing, if I'm unable to find it right here, I'm actually going ahead and just transferring the file from NinjaOne. I've uploaded it into NinjaOne, and then it just automatically pushes that file out. And that could be a zip file, it could be a registry file, it could be a SQL file. You know, there's no limit on it. So you have a lot of capability here to go ahead and just push out files as well. And I really think you can see these conditions are a huge vector for automation. Not just monitoring configuration drift, but then pushing out necessary files, monitoring for antivirus that isn't in place, or when devices are going a certain amount of time without patching. This is just a really, really critical vector for automation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I really like is the policy driven nature of it. And I think something that you maybe show is like how those can apply to the systems, and how you can create groups of systems that apply to certain automations, right? So that's something that is really interesting to me from a pen tester perspective, because you're going to have servers, you're going to have workstations, maybe you have different business groups that have for different requirements, right? So you can, because it's all policy driven, what I like is the ability to just target specific machines or group of machines and deploy various settings to those different groups without having to kind of reinvent the wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier kind of the need for different settings across different geographic regions. You mentioned law offices; they might be subject to different compliances in different areas. And so NinjaOne is very much built with that in mind. You can see here that if we look at our policies, it's not just one, so we're not just doing a one size fits all here. You can create multiple policies. So in this case here, we've got a law office here. And so this actually inherits from our overall default parent policy that we've been looking at so far. And so what that means is I get all the settings I put in my overall parent, but then I can tweak them for this particular group of devices. So in this particular case, maybe this law office, they aren't using system restore. And so down here, I can go ahead and say, well, go ahead and uncheck the system restore condition because they're not using it. So I don't want to enforce something that's going to end up causing problems for them. And you can see over here on the right-hand side, that's now overridden. And that means that this one particular line item for the system restore status that we see here, this is detached from that parent-child policy hierarchy. You can see up here that we're inheriting from that parent policy, 1A, Windows Workstation. So any changes we make to that specific line item right there, it wouldn't be received because it's overridden. And then I can go ahead and revert back to the parent policy if I want to be back in compliance with that overall parent there. So this is a great way to go ahead and create these uh, policies that maintain consistency where possible. We mentioned that consistency and that standardization. So anytime I need to push out a big change that applies to everybody, I just go to the Windows Workstation top level policy and I make my change there. But then if I need to modify something for a particular client or a particular organization, that's very easy to do. And you're not limited to just parent child. You can go grandparent, parent child. You can really nest these pretty deeply. And so at that point, we can go ahead and assign this policy to different devices. If it breaks down by organization, great. We can just go ahead and map it to our organization right here. But you also can map it based off of device type. So to your point earlier, maybe we want to treat desktops different from laptops, different from servers. And then we also have the Linux policies and the Mac policies. And so you really get this holistic experience of managing not just Windows devices, but your Mac OS devices, your Linux devices, your iPhones, your iPads, your Android devices, and then your network devices as well. You'll see that these all kind of have these policy assignments at this level. And then if you need to assign just a particular policy to a group of devices, that's really easy to go into the devices menu here. And then we could select several devices like these two servers right here. And then we could go ahead and configure the policy and then assign whatever policy that we wanted to create. So there's a lot of granularity in the system when it comes to assigning all of these various policy settings, because it's natural that different groups of devices are going to vary. It's very rarely going to be one size fits all.
Yeah. Awesome. So what's next on the demonstration? This is really exciting stuff. This is super cool to see.
So I want to talk about, there's two other things that I definitely wanted to cover. If we go into the conditions again, I wanted to look at this from a different perspective. We've been talking about sort of configuration drift with these conditions, but I also wanted to show another really cool opportunity here that's security adjacent, which right here is looking for unauthorized remote access tools. And
Awesome.
so right here, we're just running a script on a recurring basis, that script result condition we saw earlier. And if we find any of, I think, 13 common uh, remote access tools installed, we raise that alert. And so you can see here, if I find yes, there are those tools installed, that raises an alert. And if I wanted to go further than that, I could run scripts to uninstall those tools. But typically with this alert, I think this is a situation where I'd want there to be uninstallers easily present for common remote access tools, but I still probably want to go ahead and have a human being look at this and use their brain and make a decision before just automatically removing remote access tools. That's a conversation that I think is great to have, throughout your organization or with your client, so that you're all on the same page here. I know there have been times where somebody says, "Hey, I'm being very secure and I'm removing this application that nobody should be using," and then later finding out, "Hey, that was actually something that people used." So there's always going to be
Yep.
the butting of heads in between security and kind of maintaining the regular operation of the business.
I've absolutely been there before where I was a young buck in IT and I uninstalled something and then the other IT guys come over and are like, "Hey, did you touch anything on the server?" I was like, "Yeah, and uninstalled this old out of date thing. It was insecure." And like, "Well, production is down." So,
Yes. Unfortunately, those insecure things often turn out to be load bearing. I
yep.
had a NinjaOne customer who wanted to disable older versions of TLS, and they did it. And then they found out that there were legacy applications that did not support more modern versions of TLS, and that caused a lot of impact to the business. So it had to
Yep.
be undone. And I think that's a great point. We're talking about the need to secure and deploy these configurations. QA for me is just as important, or maybe not more important than all of that, because a lot of people, I think, in various organizations, their negative experience with IT doesn't necessarily come from security breaches. Their negative experience with IT comes from, uh, um, you know, misapplied configurations or bad patches being deployed that cause them disruption that are trying to promote security, but that can have a detrimental effect to an end user who's going, oh, anytime I'm always experiencing all these issues, and they're not from security breaches; they're just from bad processes that are not going smoothly. And so I think having those conversations is super, super important when you're managing devices, whether you're internal or whether you're external. That is just very, very clear communication that I feel is super important.
Absolutely. Cool. So you said there was one more thing?
There is one more thing. Uh, there is
It's
I
like the
think
Steve Jobs, but wait, there's more.
just one more thing. I actually always think of Columbo, like just one more thing.
Yep.
But maybe I'm showing my age there a little bit. Uh, yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about visibility. And so we're talking a lot about remediating, common misconfigurations in devices. For example, SMBv1. We can check and see if SMBv1 is not disabled. And then if it isn't disabled, we run a script to disable it. Uh, but how do we know? I think that's kind of the key there is how do we know? And so especially if you're looking to maintain compliances with specific configurations, uh, I like using this PowerShell module. It's called Hardening Kitty. So apologies for the name. I'm more of a dog person. I shouldn't say apologies. It's not my tool, but anyway, this is a great tool by Michael Schneider right here. It's on GitHub, and I'm sure Spencer will have this linked in the description. But what I do with this is I use this to evaluate the state of a device to find out if it's compliant with certain configurations. And so what I've done is I've set up something to where I pull the raw information in JSON and I store it in NinjaOne custom fields. And so these are super useful. They're exactly what they sound like, customizable data fields that let you store data. And so I just dump that JSON output into a custom field, and then I use a API server to pull that data and format it in a way that looks really good. And so if we come in here, you'll see a device security compliance report that is showing me my compliance with Microsoft security baselines here. And so you can see this device is fresh out of the box. Basically, no configurations have been done to it. So in this case, yeah, we're 80% failing on compliance with Microsoft security baselines. We've disabled SMBv1, but you can see there's a lot of different failures down here. Now let's go ahead and take a look where I've implemented sort of a partial Microsoft security baseline in place on a device. We'll go into our organization here and go into Steve's Snowboard Rentals, and then we'll go into the documentation section here. And so if we go down to our endpoint hardening right here, you'll see this device. This looks a little bit better. We're closer to 50-50 on this one. So if we go down a little bit further, again, you get this breakdown of all the various settings that you are or are not compliant with, which is really handy. And this is, again, something that can be very easily exported out of NinjaOne. If you need to, you could put this into a portal so that somebody could actually log in and view this information in what we call our end user portal, which is designed to do things like show knowledge base articles, which we could add this to. And so this is, again, very useful here. At this point, like I said, we've used one of the Microsoft security baseline templates, and we pushed that out partially on this device. And so, we put in place what we think is necessary for security, but maybe not everything, because we're concerned about the possibility of potentially disrupting the end user. But then if we go to another device, this is one where we've kind of taken a more aggressive stance here. So we're going to go into the law offices again, and we'll go into documentation, and then into the endpoint hardening reports here. And if we look at this, you can see here, we actually have gotten worse on this one. This one was more of a failure in terms of trying to push this out. And so you can see this gives us that visibility of where are we compliant with these various baselines and where are we not compliant. I think we often push out these configurations and we go, okay, it worked. But having the validation and the verification that it actually did what you expected, that is incredibly important, I think. And so you can see here, these reports, this gives you kind of that visibility at scale, but then we also have the conditions, which are for more operational use cases and allowing us to quickly respond to configuration drift. So again, this is, I think, a good example of how you can really expand and extend the NinjaOne platform. All this really is PowerShell, but it's a very flexible implementation of PowerShell, and you can see how I'm able to go ahead and generate these reports and create all these automations, even when they don't necessarily natively exist inside the platform. And I think that flexibility is just incredibly important in any sort of modern IT workflows.
Yeah, that's awesome. And anybody that knows me knows I'm a huge PowerShell fan. I try to do anything that you can automate or code or script or anything like that. I will always try to use PowerShell first. It's just PowerShell is my love language, really, is what it comes down to.
I'm right there with you. As weird as it is, fixing some sort of problem with PowerShell, I do find relaxing. So that is, it's a nice little puzzle box to break down.
Exactly. Awesome. Is there any other demos you want to show or anything you want to talk about related to the NinjaOne platform?
Nothing that I can think of at the moment.
Awesome.
There's always more to show, but we have a limited amount of time. So
sure. Of course. So where can people find out more? What should people do if this is super interesting to them and they want to, dig deeper into this?
Yeah, absolutely. I would start with a webinar that we'll post in the YouTube description, I imagine, that I did earlier this year or last year, maybe, that kind of dives in a little bit more deeply into a lot of the things that I talk about today. But then, yeah, definitely check out the NinjaOne website. We are posting all sorts of things on all sorts of topics, including security compliance.
Awesome. That's super cool. So I'm going to switch screens here. Awesome. So to wrap up, this was super cool, Jeff. I appreciate the demos, and I especially appreciate kind of the attention to the security aspects of it, like we were talking about at the beginning, because if it's one thing that I've learned just from pure personal experience in IT and from doing pen testing, it's that this endpoint management stuff is not always the easiest. And if you don't have the right tools, if you're doing a lot of things manually, it can be very troublesome. It can take a long time. So when you're doing pen test remediations, if it takes you 6 months, 8 months, a year to kind of like remediate some of these things, chances are the projects get dropped or you move on to other things or they lose importance and they end up not getting fixed. And then we just have the snowball effect. So I appreciate you showing and kind of focusing on the security aspects of this as well. So super cool stuff.
It was a pleasure. And yeah, thank you very much for having me. Always good to chat.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.